And so, finally, we get to sketching graphs. This is the A-level question. So this is sketching graphs when they're not in that nice vertex form that we talked about, where you can just shift y equals x squared. They're actually in this form here. We've got a few steps to do that. We've got to 1, find the y-intercept. 2, find the x-intercepts. 3, find the axis of symmetry. And 4, find the vertex. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do x-intercepts, axis of symmetry, vertex, and then the x-intercepts, because the x-intercepts are probably the hardest to find. And if you get a question like this and you know how to find the y-intercept, you know how to find the axis of symmetry, you know how to find the vertex, do that first, or at least talk about that first. Alright, even if you don't know how to do it, you can't remember how to do it exactly, make sure you talk about what you do know. Because if you put some of these down and then draw a graph with just some of this information, that is way better than nothing at all. So, let's talk about finding the y-intercept. Y-intercept is actually pretty much the simplest thing that we've done, because the y-intercept, as it says here, right here, the y-intercept is when x equals 0. Alright, so the y-intercept is when x equals 0. So we're finding the y-intercept. What ends up happening is that the end number over here always ends up being your y-intercept. So for this example down here, where we've got y equals x squared plus 5x plus 4, this end number is the y-intercept. So our y-intercept is simply when y equals 4. That's all it is. If you want another example, y equals, let's do y equals 3x squared plus 25x plus 9. That's your y-intercept, y equals 9. Because what that 0 does is effectively get rid of those. So what you get left with is y equals 9. So if we're just writing a list of things to remember over here, we're going to remember that y equals the c when we got ax squared plus bx plus c. Y equals c is the y-intercept. Alright, I think you'll agree with me that that's not too bad. Then we go into the wonderful world of x-intercepts, but we're going to skip that, remember, and go to the axis of symmetry and the vertex. So the axis of symmetry is basically the line in the middle of the graph. So if we've got a graph there and we draw a line straight through the middle, not like that, nice and straight, generally a dotted line, we draw it through the middle, it's that line. And we calculate it using this formula. Now you're not going to be given this formula, so try and remember a way to remember it. It's x equals negative b divided by 2a. One way you could remember that maybe is that on your test you will be given the formula for the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus square root of b squared take 4ac over 2a. So I don't expect you to remember that formula, but if you could remember that the axis of symmetry is this front bit and the bottom maybe, not sure, but if you can try and work out a way of remembering that it's negative b on 2a, maybe that it's sad that Brisbane Lions are 2 times better than Adelaide. I don't know. Try and remember it. The equation is x equals negative b over 2a. So, what does that mean? Well, remember, we've got graphs at the moment of this form, y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. A, b, and c are just numbers. So let's try drawing this graph. A is the number in front of x squared. If there's no number in front of x squared, that means a is 1. And in the questions you're given, big hint, a will probably always be 1. So you can pretty much bet on that. B is the number in front of x. So in this one, b is 5. So we get x equals negative 5, which is negative b, over 2 times 1. Remember, x equals negative b on 2a. If a is 5, that's going to be negative 5 divided by 2a. That means 2 times a, which is 2 times 1, which is just 2, so that's negative 5 over 2. You put that in your calculator, you get negative 2.5. So our axis of symmetry is a line that goes through this graph at the middle of this graph at x equals negative 2.5. Alright? That's the axis of symmetry. The final thing we need to remember is the vertex. Alright? So the vertex is the point that actually lies, if we think about this graph over here, the vertex is the point that lies on the axis of symmetry. So it lies on the graph on the axis of symmetry, right there. It's that point there. It's a point. That means it's got an xy value. And that's what these notes are saying down here. It's a point on the axis of symmetry. It's a point which has coordinates xy. The value for x is always the same as the axis of symmetry. Alright? To find y, then, you have to substitute the axis of symmetry into the equation. So say we have our original graph up here, y equals x squared, take 5x plus 4. We know from calculating the axis of symmetry that x equals negative 5 over 2, which is the same as negative 2.5. So what we're going to do is substitute negative 2.5 into this formula for y. So we get y equals negative 2.5, or negative 5 on 2 squared, plus 5 by negative 5 on 2 plus 4. That's multiplying there. So you get y equals negative 2.25. That's the answer. You can get that off the calculator. So therefore the point that we're looking for is negative 5 on 2 and negative 2.25. Alright, that's x and that's y. Hope that makes sense. Now I'm going to talk about the x-intercepts. Alright, so what was our graph again? Let's just remind myself of the graph. X squared plus 5x plus 4. Our graph is x squared plus 5x plus 4. We want to find the x-intercepts. That's when y equals 0. Okay, so we're going to set that equal to 0. We call the number in front of x the sum. We call the number in front of y the product. Not in front of y. We call the number on its own without a variable the constant. We call that the product. We firstly find the factors of the product. Now the factors of the product are simply two numbers that multiply together to give the product. They're two numbers which multiply to give the product. Alright? So you think about 4. Two numbers that multiply to give 4 are 2 and 2. Another two numbers are 4 and 1. Another two numbers are negative 1 and negative 4, etc. You then add them. Add those factors. Add them together. And we get 2 plus 2 equals 4. We get 4 plus 1 equals 5. We get negative 1, take 4 equals negative 5. So we 1 find the factors, we 2 add them, and then we 3 select the pair which gives you the sum above. So remember we set up here that the sum was 5. So let's just select the pair that gives a sum of 5. That's that pair. 4 and 1. 4, we're going to put them in brackets. So we get x plus 4 times x plus 1 equals 0. Now, if two things multiply together to give 0, that means that one of them must be equal to 0. So what you have here is one thing times another thing equaling 0. That means that x plus 4 equals 0 or x plus 1 equals 0. To get rid of plus 4, you take it. So you get x equals negative 4 or x equals negative 1. There we go. So Now all we've got to do is plot all the information. I'm going to write it all down here again, just so it's easy to get. Y-intercept. We said that was 9, I think. Was it? Or 4? I think it was 4. Your axis of symmetry. I have a feeling that I graphed a different one in there. Let's see. What did I find up here? Anyway, whatever your Y-intercept was. We're good. That was the example on the previous page. I think I did another one as well. But the Y-intercept is 4 for the graph we did above. The axis of symmetry is x equals negative 2.5. Your vertex is a point, negative 2.5 and negative 2.25. And your x-intercepts, which we just calculated, are negative 4 and negative 1. So let's plot it all. And this is where it's really important that if you've only found some of this, that you still plot it and draw a quadratic, because you don't need all this information. So let's go 4, negative 4, 4, negative 4, and x and y. So that's just setting my scale. I'm going to plot a y-intercept, cutting the y-axis at 4. I'm going to plot an axis of symmetry, negative 2.5. Let's plot the vertex first. So let's plot negative 4 and negative 1, and then plot an axis of symmetry, which actually happens always to go through the middle of the vertex of the two x-intercepts. So that's negative 1. That's x equals negative 2.5. And then our vertex lies on that somewhere at about negative 2.25. Negative 2.5 and negative 2.25. So there we go. We've plotted all our points. All we've got to do is join them together. Join them together. Like that. And we get our graph. Alright? That's probably the hardest thing you'd have to do.